Lower your voice. You're being watched. What they missed was who was watching back, and how quietly authority was about to collapse. Stay with us. They thought this moment would end in silence. They were wrong, and the shift is impossible to ignore. Where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments. Point. Have you ever rewritten your own story? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Black Stories Untold with love, and ring that notification bell for more heartwarming stories that celebrate strength. The cabin breathed with the steady rhythm of altitude and habit, a long silver corridor suspended between where people came from and who they believed they were becoming. Overhead lights cast a muted glow across rows of seats, softening faces into versions of themselves meant for public view. There was comfort in the order of it all, assigned places, quiet instructions, a promise that if everyone followed the rules, the journey would pass without friction. Violet Thompson sat near the window with her hands folded neatly in her lap. She was small for her age, her legs not quite reaching the floor, her sneakers resting against the edge of a magazine tucked into the seat pocket. Her skin carried the deep warmth of summer even under artificial light. Her eyes were wide and observant, taking in the slow choreography of the cabin as if she were memorizing it. She traveled alone, but she did not look afraid. She looked careful, as if she understood that being good meant being invisible. Across the aisle, Sage Robinson watched her, without turning her head. Sage had learned long ago how to see without being seen. Her posture was relaxed, her face composed, the kind of beauty that did not ask permission to exist. She wore calm the way others wore jewelry. People noticed her without knowing why. She noticed everything. A flight attendant paused near Violet Row. The pause lasted a moment too long. The smile that followed was thin and practiced, all surface and no warmth. Violet straightened, instinctively drawing her shoulders in, making herself smaller in a space that already felt too large. A question was asked, not cruel, not loud, just pointed enough to land. The cabin did not react. That was how it always began. No raised voices, no sudden movements, only a shift in attention, a subtle turning of heads that pretended to be coincidence. Eyes flicked toward the girl and then away. A man adjusted his headphones. A woman pretended to read. Politeness wrapped itself around discomfort and passed it forward like a shared secret. Sage felt the change before she saw it. The air around Violet seemed to tighten, the way it did when expectation replaced curiosity. She watched the way the attendant stood taller, voice firmer, authority settling in as if summoned by something unseen. Violet nodded quickly, answering in short, careful phrases, her hands gripping the fabric of her jeans. A few rows back, a handsome white man noticed something was off. He had the look of someone used to moving easily through spaces, shoulders broad, expression open. He frowned slightly, then looked away, telling himself there was probably an explanation, that the system knew what it was doing. Comfort lived in that assumption. Sage did not look away. She saw how Violet's gaze flicked toward the aisle and then back to the window, searching for something familiar in the endless blue outside. She saw the way the attendant's smile never reached her eyes. She saw how power settled into the moment without announcing itself. Nothing had happened yet. That was the most dangerous part. The injustice was still forming, still polite, enough to be dismissed later as misunderstanding. It lived in tone and posture and the unspoken belief that some people required more watching than others. The plane continued forward, engines humming, unaware of the line that had just been drawn down the center of the cabin, one side filled with routine, the other with quiet judgment, and in between sat a child who should have been protected by the simple act of being seen as worthy. Sage inhaled slowly, her gaze steady. She did not move. Not yet. But something inside her shifted, the calm surface giving way to a deeper resolve. This was how it began. Softly, politely, and if left alone, it would end exactly the way it always did. Sage Robinson had learned the language of control long before she ever needed to use it. It was written into the way she held her shoulders back without stiffness, the way her breathing stayed slow even when the room shifted. Control was not domination. It was discipline. It was knowing exactly when to move and when to remain still. She sat with her hands resting loosely in her lap, fingers relaxed, her posture unforced. The cabin light brushed across her face, catching the smooth planes of her cheekbones and the quiet intelligence in her eyes. She was beautiful in a way that did not ask to be admired. It simply existed. The kind of beauty that unsettled people because it did not come with apology or performance. She did not shrink. She did not announce herself. She occupied space with certainty. Sage had been taught early how rooms worked, how power could sit in a chair and never raise its voice, how danger often arrived smiling. As a girl, she had learned to listen not just to words, but to the spaces between them, to notice when a tone sharpened, when politeness hardened into scrutiny, when curiosity turned into control. That education had not been gentle, but it had been thorough. From her seat, she watched Violet with a steady gaze that never startled, never pressured. She saw the way the child adjusted herself to match the expectation placed on her. How quickly Violet nodded, how carefully she chose her movements. Sage recognized that instinct, the instinct to become agreeable before being accused, to offer compliance before resistance was demanded. The flight attendant voice drifted down the aisle, smooth and efficient, carrying the authority of procedure. To anyone listening casually, it would have sounded routine. Sage heard what lived underneath it, the subtle insistence, the unspoken assumption, the quiet test to see how much space the girl would give up without being asked twice. Sage did not intervene. Not yet. She understood the weight of timing. She had learned that speaking too early allowed the moment to be reframed. That protest without proof was often dismissed as sensitivity. That composure was not passivity, but preparation. Across the aisle, the handsome man shifted in his seat. He glanced toward Violet and then toward Sage, his brow furrowing as if he sensed a disruption he could not name. He looked like someone who had never had to question his belonging, someone used to being treated as neutral, safe, uncomplicated. Sage noticed him too. She always noticed who was watching and who was choosing not to. Her gaze returned to Violet. The child eyes flicked toward the window again, searching the clouds as if they might offer escape or explanation. Sage felt a tightening in her chest, not panic, not anger, but recognition. This was the moment when a child learned something without being taught. Learned where she stood. Learned how easily attention could turn into judgment. Sage's spine remained straight. Her face remained calm. But beneath that calm, a decision was forming. She would not allow this moment to pass unmarked. She would not let the lesson settle quietly into Violet bones. Control, she knew, was not about overpowering others. It was about refusing to be moved before you were ready. It was about letting those who misjudged you reveal themselves fully. And when the moment came, when silence had done its work and truth had nowhere left to hide, Sage Robinson would speak. And when she did, it would be impossible to ignore. Violet Thompson had learned how to take up as little space as possible without ever being told to. It lived in the way she folded her hands together, fingers laced tight, resting them carefully on her knees. It showed in how she sat straight, but not tall, as if height itself were something that needed permission. She was small, yes, but there was a quiet light about her. A softness that suggested curiosity still lived inside her, despite the rules she had already learned. Her eyes moved constantly, absorbing everything. The aisle lights, the curve of the wing outside her window, the soft ding of overhead compartments opening and closing. She noticed things with care, the way children do when they are trying not to be noticed at all. Her smile came quickly when spoken to, polite and automatic, shaped by years of being told that good manners could soften any situation, that if she was pleasant enough, agreeable enough, the world might leave her alone. At first, the crew voice toward her was kind, helpful, a gentle reminder about her seatbelt, a quick check on her tray table. Violet nodded eagerly, responding with yes and thank you before the sentences were even finished. She wanted to do everything right. She wanted to be easy. Then the tone shifted. Not sharply, not enough to raise alarm. It hardened just slightly, like a door closing quietly instead of slamming. The words became shorter, the questions more pointed. The smile lingered less. Violet felt it before she understood it, the way a child senses when warmth has been withdrawn. She adjusted in her seat, smoothing the fabric of her jeans, her shoulders pulling inward. Her answers grew smaller, her voice softer. She glanced up only when necessary, her eyes searching faces for cues. Was she in trouble? Had she done something wrong? No one said so. That was the worst part. The cabin around her continued as if nothing had changed. Passengers scrolled on their screens. Someone laughed softly at a movie playing through headphones. A cart rattled down the aisle, coffee cups clinking gently. Violet sat at the center of it all, her presence suddenly framed as something that needed monitoring. A question came that sounded like concern, but carried the weight of suspicion. Another reminder that felt less like guidance and more like correction. Violet nodded again, her mouth forming yes automatically, even as confusion flickered behind her eyes. She did not argue. She did not ask why. She did not know she was allowed to. Her cheeks warmed, not from embarrassment alone, but from something deeper. The feeling of being seen too closely and not seen at all. Of being reduced to a problem without understanding the charge. She stared out the window, letting the blue stretch of sky steady her breathing. In that moment, Violet learned something the world never announces, that politeness does not always protect you, that obedience does not guarantee kindness, that sometimes being good is not enough to be treated as worthy. She sat quietly, holding herself together, unaware of the eyes watching her from across the aisle, unaware of the woman who saw not just a child being corrected, but a pattern unfolding. Violet did not know that this moment would not end the way it usually did. For now she was simply a girl on a plane, luminous and careful, absorbing a lesson she never asked to learn. The senior attendant arrived with the quiet confidence of someone who believed the rules would always stand behind her. Her uniform was immaculate, pressed lines sharp, her smile professional but detached. She did not rush. She did not raise her voice. Authority did not need urgency. It only needed recognition. She positioned herself beside Violet's seat, body angled just enough to command the aisle. The questions resumed, framed as procedure, delivered with an air of inevitability. Violet tried to answer, but her words were interrupted, gently at first, then more decisively. Each time she opened her mouth, the response came before she could finish, correcting her memory, adjusting her explanation, reshaping her story to fit the version already decided. Passengers nearby began to notice. Not enough to intervene, enough to look. A woman 2 rows ahead shifted in her seat and stared straight ahead. A man pretended to scroll through his phone while listening closely. Someone coughed. Someone sighed. No one spoke. The attendant voice carried down the aisle, calm and clipped, repeating the same phrases with slight variations. Safety, policy, protocol, words that sounded neutral, harmless, almost comforting. Violet nodded along, her hemoglobin goving automatically, her eyes darting between faces searching for reassurance. Her hands clenched in her lap, fingers twisting fabric as if grounding herself to the seat. She was no longer a child traveling alone. She was a situation, a disruption, something to be managed publicly so the rest of the cabin could feel secure. The attendant asked her to adjust her posture, to respond more clearly, to follow instructions more carefully. Each request landed like a correction of character rather than behavior. Sage watched it all unfold with a stillness that bordered on reverence. Her face revealed nothing, her body remained relaxed, but her attention sharpened, every detail catalogued with precision. She saw how the attendant stood just close enough to tower, how Violet's voice was repeatedly spoken over, her attempts at explanation dismissed before they could settle. She saw how the rules were being used not to protect, but to control. The system was efficient. It did not shout. It did not threaten. It simply proceeded, confident that its authority would not be questioned. That was its strength. That was its danger. The handsome man across the aisle shifted again. His discomfort was visible now, etched into the lines around his mouth. He opened his lips as if to speak, then closed them. He glanced toward Sage, then back to the attendant. He told himself it was not his place, that someone else would step in, that the situation was probably being handled. Violet's gaze dropped to the floor, her shoulders curved inward, the light in her eyes dimmed just slightly, not extinguished, but muted. She was learning how quickly the world could decide who you were without listening, how easily authority could overwrite truth. The attendant finished her instructions and stepped back, satisfied. The moment was framed as resolved. The aisle cleared, the cabin exhaled, but the air did not return to normal. Something lingered, a quiet wrongness that settled into the space between seats. Sage remained seated, her gaze fixed on Violet. She did not rush to comfort. She did not intervene yet. She understood what had just happened was bigger than a single exchange. It was a pattern, playing out exactly as designed, polished and practiced, protected by silence. And she understood something else. That once a child had been positioned as a problem, the damage had already been done. The only question now was whether it would be allowed to stand. Sage's fingers curled slightly in her lap, not in anger, but in readiness. The moment was approaching, and when it arrived, the system would finally be forced to see what it had been so certain it controlled. He had been comfortable in the world for most of his life, and comfort had taught him to trust the flow of things. The plane was just another place where systems worked as promised. Seats were assigned, rules were followed, problems were handled quietly by people in uniform. He had learned to believe that order meant fairness, that authority implied care. He noticed the shift when it was already underway, not at the beginning, when it could still be mistaken for routine. He noticed when the tone changed, when the questions stopped sounding curious and began sounding corrective. His eyes lifted from the screen in his hand, drawn by something he could not quite name. He saw the child. He saw the attendant. He saw the way the aisle seemed to narrow around them. He frowned slightly, a crease forming between his brows. The girl looked small in the seat, her body folded inward, her answers short. She reminded him of someone, a niece, a neighbor kid. Someone he would protect instinctively if the setting were different, if it were simpler. He told himself it was none of his business, that there were rules he did not understand, that the attendant knew more than he did. Comfort made those thoughts come easily. Comfort always offered reasons to stay still. Still, something tugged at him, a faint discomfort that settled in his chest. He glanced toward the woman across the aisle, the one who had been watching without looking. There was something in her stillness that unsettled him more than the interaction itself. She did not fidget. She did not avert her eyes. She seemed to be waiting. The attendant voice carried on, calm and authoritative. The man shifted in his seat, his knee bouncing once before he stilled it. He imagined speaking up, asking a simple question, creating a pause. The idea rose and fell within him, never quite taking shape. He worried about being wrong, about misunderstanding, about embarrassing himself or someone else. Silence, he knew, was safer, so he stayed quiet. He watched the girl nod again, her shoulders tightening. He watched the attendant step closer, then step back, satisfied. He felt the moment close like a door that would not be reopened. The cabin exhaled, relieved, order restored. Relief did not find him. Instead, a dull awareness settled in. He understood too late that he had just participated in something without acting, that his inaction had weight. He had not caused the harm, but he had allowed it room to breathe. He looked at the child again. Her eyes were on the window now, the blue beyond it, impossibly wide. He wondered what she would remember from this flight, the destination, the clouds, or this moment of being corrected in front of strangers who pretended not to see. Across the aisle, the woman finally shifted, just slightly. The man felt it like a signal passing through the space between them. He did not know her name. He did not know her story. But he sensed that whatever came next would not be quiet. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. The pause he had benefited from was ending. He had been measured by it, whether he liked it or not. And as he sat there, still and watching, he understood something that comfort had never taught him. That silence was not neutral. It was a choice. And every choice, even the quiet ones, left a mark. The cabin settled into a fragile calm that felt earned, but undeserved. Voices lowered. Movement resumed. The system had decided the moment was over. But Violet remained exactly where the moment had left her. She sat smaller now, though no one had asked her to move. Her shoulders curved forward, protecting something tender inside her chest. Her hands no longer rested neatly in her lap. They were clasped together, fingers pressing into each other as if to confirm she was still there. Her gaze stayed fixed on the window, on the endless blue that asked nothing of her and judged nothing in return. Dignity does not always shatter loudly. Sometimes it thins. Sometimes it bends just enough to be reshaped. Sage felt it the instant the air shifted back to normal, that false normal, the kind that arrives after harm and pretends nothing meaningful occurred. Her body remained still, but something inside her loosened and tightened all at once, a quiet alignment of knowing and responsibility. She had been waiting for certainty. Now she had it. She had learned this moment well. The moment when restraint stopped being wisdom and began to look like consent, when silence no longer protected but enabled, when waiting turned into allowing. Her breathing stayed even, but her awareness sharpened. She felt the weight of the cabin differently now, the way authority had moved freely while the child had been anchored to her seat, the way attention had gathered and dispersed without accountability, the way people returned to their comforts as if discomfort were contagious. Sage did not blame them. She understood comfort. She understood fear. She understood how easy it was to mistake quiet for peace, but understanding did not excuse what came next. She watched Violet carefully, not to intervene yet, to witness, to honor the reality of what had happened before it could be erased. The girl blinked slowly, her lashes trembling just once before steadying. She did not cry. She did not protest. She did what children learn to do when the world grows sharp around them. She endured. That endurance settled heavily in Sage's chest. Across the aisle, the man shifted again. His gaze flicked between Sage and Violet, unease now unmistakable. He sensed the change without understanding it. Something was approaching. He could feel it in the way Sage's stillness had altered. Not broken, focused. Sage's fingers relaxed against her palm. Her shoulders remained loose. Her face betrayed nothing, but the calculation had ended. She no longer needed more information. The pattern was complete. She thought of all the moments that had been explained away by politeness. All the times restraint had been praised while harm continued uninterrupted. All the times silence had been called maturity while injustice sharpened its edges. This was the moment those lessons led to. Not confrontation for its own sake, not performance. Just truth, placed precisely where it could no longer be ignored. She shifted in her seat, barely perceptible, but Violet noticed. The girl eyes flicked toward the aisle, catching the movement. For the first time since the exchange began, Violet's gaze held on something solid, something intentional. Sage met her eyes briefly, not with urgency, not with pity, with certainty. The decision settled fully then, heavy, clear, unavoidable. Silence had done its work. It had revealed exactly who would allow what to happen. Now it was time for something else. Sage drew in a breath, deep and steady, not to prepare for conflict, to prepare for truth, the kind that arrives without raising its voice and leaves no room for retreat. The choice had been made, and once made, it could not be undone. Sage rose without announcement. No sharp movement, no dramatic pause, just the quiet certainty of someone who had already decided. The seat released her easily, the aisle opening as if it had been waiting for her all along. Conversations nearby faded, not because she demanded silence, but because something in her presence requested attention without asking for it. She stood beside Violet Rowe, close enough to be seen, far enough to leave space. Her posture was relaxed, her hands open at her sides. She did not look at the attendant first. She looked at the child. Violet eyes lifted slowly, cautious, unsure. Sage met her gaze and held it. There was no urgency in her expression, no alarm, just recognition, the kind that steadies the body before the mind understands why. Then Sage turned to the attendant. Her voice carried easily, not raised, not sharpened. It did not cut through the cabin. It settled into it, calm, measured, exact, the kind of voice people leaned toward instinctively because it made room for listening. She did not accuse. She did not narrate what had happened. She did not ask for a supervisor or reference policy. She asked a single question, framed with care, delivered with clarity. She asked why a child who had followed every instruction was being addressed as though she had done something wrong. The words landed gently. That was their power. The aisle went still, not frozen, attentive. The low hum of the plane seemed suddenly louder, the background noise stripped bare around the question now suspended in the air. No one moved to fill the silence. No one rushed to smooth it over. The attendant blinked once. Her rehearsed responses did not surface. Procedure offered no immediate answer to a question that did not challenge rules but intention. Her posture shifted just slightly, authority recalibrating in real time. Passengers nearby looked up fully now. Screens lowered, headphones slid back. The moment no longer belonged to the system. It belonged to the truth that had been invited in. Sage waited. She did not rush the response. She did not rescue the attendant from the discomfort. She understood that discomfort was necessary. It was the sound of something being examined for the first time. Violet sat very still. But something in her had changed. Her shoulders loosened, her hands unclenched. She watched Sage with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing this version of the world, the one where questions could be asked without punishment. The handsome man across the aisle felt his breath catch. He realized then that this was what he had sensed earlier, not anger, precision. Sage had not interrupted to escalate. She had interrupted to clarify, and clarity was proving far more unsettling than outrage ever could be. The attendant answered eventually. Her words were careful, her tone softened. She spoke of misunderstandings, of routine checks, of safety. But the cadence had shifted. The certainty was gone. The cabin heard it. Sage listened without reacting. When the explanation ended, she nodded once. Not approval, acknowledgement. Then she spoke again, just briefly. She said that safety included how people were spoken to, that children remembered tone longer than instructions. That respect was not a courtesy but a standard. No applause followed, no confrontation. None was needed. The question had already done its work. Power had moved, quietly but decisively, from assumption to accountability. Sage stepped back into the aisle and returned to her seat. The cabin remained silent for a moment longer, absorbing what had shifted. The plane continued forward, unchanged in its course, but something fundamental had been altered in the space between the seats. Violet looked out the window again. This time her reflection looked different. The shift did not arrive with an announcement. It arrived the way weather changes on open water, felt before it was named, a subtle recalibration in posture, a careful clearing of the throat. The attendant glanced toward the galley and then back, eyes narrowing not in suspicion but in recognition that came a beat too late. Another crew member approached, drawn by the quiet gravity of what had just occurred. There was a pause, brief and telling, as names were exchanged softly out of Violet hearing. Sage did not offer hers. It surfaced on its own, carried by memory and association, by the kind of consequence that followed certain people long before they spoke. When it landed, it did not make a sound. It made space. Voices lowered, shoulders eased. The script shifted. The senior attendant's smile returned, reshaped now with warmth carefully applied. Words softened, phrases lengthened. The language of procedure loosened its grip, revealing choice beneath what had been presented as necessity. A tray was adjusted gently. An apology began to form, without fully becoming one. There was concern now, attentiveness, a careful effort to restore balance without acknowledging what had tipped it in the first place. Passengers noticed. They always did. The handsome man across the aisle felt the change in his chest before he understood it. This was not resolution. This was recalculation. He recognized it because he had lived inside it all his life. The moment when authority bent, not because it was wrong, but because it had been recognized. Sage watched without satisfaction. She did not correct the tone or demand acknowledgement. Her gaze rested briefly on Violet, checking not for damage, but for steadiness. The child sat taller now, curiosity returning in cautious increments. She was being addressed with gentler words, with care that arrived late, but unmistakably. Late care still counted, but it did not undo the earlier harm. The insult became visible only in its absence, in the sudden politeness, in the careful phrasing, in the eagerness to explain rather than instruct. What had been framed as neutral was now revealed as discretionary. What had been delivered as routine was exposed as choice. The cabin could feel it. The difference between how Violet had been spoken to before and how she was spoken to now echoed louder than any raised voice ever could. Sage remained composed. Recognition was not the point. Protection was. She understood the limits of respect that arrived only after a name carried weight. She had lived with that truth long enough to know it was a currency that never reached everyone equally. The crew completed their checks with renewed gentleness. A quiet offer of assistance, a reassurance delivered directly to Violet, eyes level now, tone softened to sincerity. The child nodded, receiving it without shrinking, her hands resting open in her lap. The handsome man swallowed. He understood then what had been missing earlier. Not rules, not clarity, courage. He saw how quickly the system could adapt when it wanted to. He felt the cost of the delay settle heavy in his chest. Sage leaned back into her seat, the moment complete, but unresolved. She had not asked for recognition. She had not needed to. It had arrived on its own, trailing consequences that could not be gathered back up. Respect had come, but too late to pretend nothing had happened. The plane moved on, engine steady, course unchanged. Yet the cabin felt altered. A truth had been revealed in plain sight. Not everyone would name it, but no one could unknow it now. And Violet, luminous and careful, carried forward not the apology she never received, but the memory of being seen when it mattered. Sage did not smile when the tone changed. She did not soften in response to the softened voices. Recognition had arrived, yes, but she treated it with the distance of someone who understood its cost. She had lived long enough inside its shadow to know how conditional it could be. Respect that followed a name was not the same as respect freely given. It was a correction, not a cure. She shifted slightly in her seat, just enough to be felt. The attendant hovered nearby, posture careful now, eyes attentive. The cabin waited, though no one announced that waiting aloud. Sage turned her gaze toward the aisle, not confrontational, not indulgent, clear. She spoke again, her voice steady, unhurried. It did not rise above the hum of the plane. It did not need to. She said that the child should have been treated with care before anyone knew who she was connected to. That dignity was not a reward for recognition, that it was not something earned through association. It was the starting point. The words settled heavily. Not dramatic, not sharp, just true. The attendant nodded quickly, lips pressed together, understanding passing across her face in stages. There was no defense offered this time, no policy cited, only the quiet discomfort of being seen clearly. Sage did not linger on it. She had not come to extract remorse. She had come to mark the moment. Across the aisle, the man felt something loosen and tighten at once. He had watched the exchange unfold, had witnessed the recalibration, the sudden courtesy, and now he heard what he had missed earlier, not the rule violation, the human one. He cleared his throat, the sound small but intentional. Heads turned. He did not look at Sage immediately. He looked at Violet. He spoke carefully, as if testing each word before releasing it. He said that he had noticed something was wrong earlier, that he had felt it, that he had stayed quiet anyway. He did not excuse it. He named it. He said he had waited for someone else to act, that he had benefited from the pause that allowed harm to continue. The admission did not redeem him. It did not need to. It placed him properly within the moment. Sage listened without nodding, without reassurance. Growth did not require applause. Accountability did not ask to be made comfortable. She respected the honesty without rushing to relieve its weight. Violet watched him closely. Her face did not change much, but something in her eyes sharpened. She was seeing a new version of adulthood, one that did not pretend certainty, one that did not hide behind silence. The cabin absorbed the exchange quietly. No one interrupted, no one rushed to move on. The discomfort lingered, as it should. It was the price of learning something real. Sage turned back toward Violet then, just briefly. She met her eyes and held them. There was no lesson delivered, no reassurance spoken, just presence, the kind that says you were right to feel what you felt. You were not imagining it. You were never the problem. The engines hummed steadily beneath them, the plane continuing forward without pause. But the people inside it were not in the same place they had been before. Being known had its cost. Sage carried it daily. But she had paid it willingly in this moment, not for recognition, but to make something unmistakably clear. Dignity did not arrive because of who Violet Mother was. It should have been there all along. The descent began gently, announced by a soft shift in pressure and the quiet tilt of the cabin. Outside the window, the blue thinned into layers of cloud and land, the world returning in fragments. The plane moved, as it always did, obedient to physics and destination. But inside, something had already arrived. Violet sat differently now. Not dramatically, not defiantly. Just taller. Her back pressed into the seat with intention rather than caution. Her hands rested open in her lap, no longer clasped for protection. She watched the land below with interest instead of escape. The child who had folded inward earlier had not disappeared, but she had been joined by something steadier, a knowing that she had been seen when it mattered. Sage remained exactly as she had been from the beginning, composed, grounded, whole. She had not changed her posture or her expression. She had not needed to. This moment had not added to her or taken anything away. It had simply revealed what was already there. Strength that did not perform, authority that did not posture, power that did not rush. The crew moved through final procedures with careful efficiency. Voices were calm, movements deliberate. The earlier edge was gone, replaced with professionalism that now felt intentional rather than assumed. Violet was addressed gently, eyes level, tone respectful. It should not have felt remarkable, but everyone felt the difference. Across the aisle, the man watched the runway approach, his reflection faint in the window. He felt changed in a way that would not announce itself later. No resolution speech, no vow to do better spoken aloud, just the quiet understanding that he would not hesitate the same way again. That silence had a sound. That comfort carried responsibility. The wheels touched down with a muted thud, the familiar jolt that pulled everyone forward and back into their bodies. Applause did not follow. It was not that kind of flight. The plane slowed, engines reversing, speed shedding itself in long, measured breaths. As they taxied toward the gate, passengers reached for bags and jackets, returning to the rituals of arrival. The moment began to recede into memory, as moments always did. But it did not dissolve. It stayed with those who had witnessed it, settling into them differently, depending on what they were willing to carry. Sage stood when it was time, allowing Violet to step into the aisle ahead of her. She placed a gentle hand on the child's shoulder, not guiding, not directing, simply present. Violet glanced back once, her eyes bright and steady. There was gratitude there, but also something else. Recognition, not of status or name, of alignment. They moved forward with the line of passengers, merging into the ordinary choreography of disembarkation. No one stopped them. No one needed to. The truth they carried required no escort. At the door, cool air brushed against their faces, the promise of ground and gravity waiting just beyond the threshold. Violet stepped onto the jet bridge with confidence, her strides small but sure. Sage followed, unchanged, unbowed. There was no revenge in how this ended, no punishment, no spectacle, just clarity. Some power announces itself loudly, demanding space and attention. The most dangerous kind never has to. It simply stands. Before you go, think of the woman who keeps shrinking to survive. This story is her reminder that being overlooked never erased her worth. Share this video and place strength back in her hands, and the world adjusts around it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, drop a comment, and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe to Black Stories Untold for more stories that uncover hidden struggles, celebrate strength, and remind us that every voice matters.